I threw this casserole dish a couple days ago. It's taken a few days to get firm enough to be worked with. I also threw the casserole, I threw the lid. When I was throwing the lid, I mentioned to leave this excess on the outside because it's a good handle, and now you can turn your lid upside down and see if it fits, and it does. Gonna put it back on there. Things in the studio don't dry and don't dry, and now they're drying fairly quickly, so I'll just give it a moisten and it'll wait till I'm ready to trim. I'm gonna trim this casserole, put it upside down on a bat. I always trim on the wooden bats. It's just, I like to. So now I wanna make sure that my casserole one is leveled this way and it's centered in the middle. The first thing I'm going to do is level it, and the part that is higher will touch. You can see it's not quite level. I'm not too worried about center. I might move it a little close to the center. Now I'm just going to, it's a little bit off, and as you see, I just lower that side by persuading it to be lower. It should be level now. That's pretty good. And I want to make sure it's centered this way. The part that is furthest away from the wheel will touch the needle. I'll push that to the wheel. It'll make a mark. And I'm going to start from one side of the mark. I've discussed centering and all this before. Move it ever so slightly and try it again. I'm going to quickly center this pot. Now it's centered here and it's level there. I don't worry too much about it not being perfectly centered here. Pots are like people. Very few of us are absolutely perfect. I'm going to trim, so I've centered here, level there, and I'm going to join them together with the trimming tool. I mentioned when I throw this, I throw fairly thick. There's a lot of clay here to work with, so I can make the kind of foot that I want. I'm going to start by just getting rid of that part that was attached to the wheel. Notice I'm always connected. I hold on to my trimming tool in my hand this way. My index finger is controlling it. I'm on my leg. My hands are connected. I'm always that triangle of strength, as I call it. I'm going to put on the foot. I always do. One, I like the look of it. And two, as I mentioned, I like to hold on to pots in the glazing when I'm glazing them and glaze only their rim. It shows up on our prairies glaze and various glazes. And this makes a great handle for glazing your pots. And it's going to go in there and make a little bit of definition. A pot should, when you're throwing it, should come up and say, I'm done. And when it's trimming and it's trimmed, it's sitting on the table, it should say, I'm sitting here. It should always have a presence. And the foot lifts it up a bit, gives it some presence. It puts a little bit of the absolute bottom under shadow. When you're glazing your pot, you can't glaze all the way down to the bottom. There has to be a 1/4 inch or so of pot. And if that is undercut and in shadow, it just looks nicer. And I always give the pot, most always give the pot. There's a few pots I don't. This profile, I'm going to tidy up the middle just by dropping that down, and that toe. I'm going to hold the tool at an angle, and I'm just going to go straight across. The cutting edge is on this part. And you can tell by tapping, there's still quite a bit of clay there. As I mentioned, this is a casserole dish. It's going to be going in the oven and hopefully hanging around for a couple hundred years anyway. It is trimmed. I'm just going to bring it all together. I like a definite line. I like to trim because then I have the shape that I want. But do keep in mind as you're trimming, you do have a finite amount of clay. You can't take one more cut. You can lose the whole thing. I'm going to erase all my trimming marks. And I don't like that right there. Well, that was rude. Going to erase all my trimming marks by sponging it with the damp sponge. The sponge takes out the little particles and seals the clay, and you can't tell where your trimming started and your throwing ended. Stamp my pots because I always stamp my pots out of the fire, and made in Canada because we're out of the fire and they're made in Canada. After I've tidied it with my finger, I'm going to stamp it out of the fire, studio, and made in Canada. I want to take this off. I have scraped off the little bit of clay that was left behind when I cut it, wet my bat on both sides. Put my paper on the bat. As I said, you can use any paper for this. Any, I don't know, paper. Maybe a bill you got in the mail or something you don't want to acknowledge exists. An email from your mom. Anyway, you can use any paper on that. I just use roll-ins from the newspapers, from the local newspaper. I'm going to put it on there. Gently pop that off and turn it upside down this way. Put it back on the wheel, and I just want to, you can tidy that edge. I'm not going to worry too much about centered here. One, your edge is all tidy from sponging and you don't want to start scratching it. I'm just going to make it tidy. And I do like to take just a piece of plastic. As I mentioned, this is just the plastic that covers your leftovers in your kitchen. I won't use this one to cover my leftovers in the kitchen. And just going to hold it there. Makes a nice, smooth, tidy edge. The glaze goes on nicer, it feels nicer, and it's just nicer. So that's trimming it. We'll put some handles on this in a bit, and we'll tidy up and trim the lid.